Hi everyone, and welcome to the next video on the Tal Memorial. Today was the last round and Kramnik secured first place with a draw against Ivanchuk, who missed a continuation in time trouble that would have undoubtedly won him the tournament. It was 23, knight d takes e6 instead of h4, in case you're wondering. Carlsen secured his second consecutive win in his game against Peter Lecco to finish up tied for second place with Aronian, in the process going to the #1 spot in the world on the live ratings, ahead of Veselin Topalov. Morozevich had another bad defeat in his game against Ponomaryov, and Svidler Gelfand was a draw. The game I thought we'd look at is Anand Aronian, which was the only miniature of the entire tournament. Anand, who is the world champion, seems to have problems when he plays Aronian, who I believe is up 5-1 when the two have played with classic time controls, and 8-4 if you include blitz and games like that. He certainly had a great year in tournaments and continues to show his excellence at the top level. Anand had the white pieces anyway and opened with d4, and Aronian answered symmetrically with d5, and then came the Slav defense to the Queen's Gambit declined with c4 and c6, and then came some normal developing moves with knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, and a6, which is an unusual but not unheard of continuation from Aronian. As far as I'm aware, it has no official name, but a6 is played in many lines of the Queen's Gambit declined. It supports the move b5, which is often played either to support a pawn at c4 if d takes c4, or to gain a tempo against a white piece on c4 for queenside expansion. Say if the e-pawn's moved and d takes c4, bishop takes c4, b5, and the bishop will have to move, and then black can expand on the queen's side. And Aronian's idea here is to push immediately on the queen's side and put pressure on the white position. Anand continued with e3, and now came an immediate b5, which applies this pressure to the c4 pawn and encourages Vishy to push it forward, which he did with c5. And now comes a logical plan from Aronian with knight bd7, which is preparing to move e5 in order to challenge the white center, which can be done now without the problem of an isolated pawn being created in the process because c5 has been played by Vishy. And it's a sound opening strategy from Aronian. It's very logical and it ensures him some good play and at the very least equality. Vishy continued with bishop d3, and now came e5 and knight takes e5. If instead d takes e5, now comes knight g4, and white has no further way to support the pawn, and on the contrary, this is even better for black because he will end up with a strong central knight after knight g takes e5. He'll have a knight on e5, it's going to be a strong central knight supported by a knight, so you know it's even better for black, that continuation. So Vishy played knight takes e5, and after knight takes e5, d takes e5, Aronian played knight d7, and this is the last book move of the game. This pawn here at c5 is now a liability for white, and supporting it with b4 would be dangerously weakening and fairly pointless, seeing as Aronian could then just take the e pawn, and the continuation that Vishy went for was e6, and this is the move recommended by Fritz, although black gets good initiative after knight takes c7, e takes f7 check, and king takes f7, despite losing castling rights. However, here Vishy made the first of a couple of bad moves that lost him the game quickly. b3 is what he played here, and it's an almost inconceivable move from the world champion. Apparently he played it quite quickly, and perhaps he was thinking about what he would play after the logical bishop c2, which gave equality and was much better in this position, and after that playing b3 and bishop b2 on and shadowing on the queen's side would be a natural continuation where both bishops would be raining down on this vulnerable black king. And it's not uncommon for players to get ahead of themselves in calculation and play a move that they were intending for a little later, but from Vishy it's very surprising. And it's also possible that maybe he accidentally touched a b pawn or something like that, but this is also unlikely. And in any case, Aronian gladly accepted the bishop pair now with knight takes d3 check, and after queen takes d3 and queen g5, black has a big edge, almost a pawn up already in terms of position, and it's only the 13th move of the game. Already he's seized the initiative from white due to the threat on the g2 pawn, which interrupts white's development considerably. Castling is suicidal now because of bishop h3, and moving the queen again to defend g2 loses tempo, which is crucial in this position, and moving the rook loses castling rights. So Vishy decided upon g3, but this gives him some pretty serious light square weaknesses, especially considering black's bishop pair, and in particular his light square bishop, because white has no counterpart. And what's instructive here is that Aronian, as with Ivanchuk in his game against Morozovich, never lets go of his positional advantage and presses it until it's transferred into a winning position. He continued here with queen f6, which is aiming for f3 next, and it's a square that's been fatally weakened by g3 being played. And Vishy continued his plan of fiend shadowing on the queen side, and Aronian moved into the f3 weakness with his queen and stopped Aronian from castling. He can't castle long now because the queen's stopping it, and if he castles short, then bishop h3 is easily winning for black. And this move, queen f3, also comes with tempo because of the threat on this rook at h1. And Vishy moved it to g1 now, which is the best square, and Aronian continued with the strongest moves all game, and this, as I said, very instructive about how he just maintains the pressure. Bishop g4 is what he played now, which ties the white queen to the mate threat on e2 if this knight was able to move. It's setting up some tactics and other ideas. And an interesting point at this stage is that black is behind in development, yet has a stronger position, which is an unusual situation, as break is kind of, against some of the usual fundamental rules of chess. And Vishy now played a prophylactic move, a3, which is preventing bishop b4, and Aronian took the opportunity to take control of the semi-open e-file now with the rook e8. And just looking at the position here, it's immediately clear that black has all of the positional trumps, and Vishy played an inferior move here, something that's pretty much inevitable when you start to get a losing position. What he played was rook c1, and this gives black even more of an advantage. It makes sense to move the rook to the semi-open file and to pressurize this weak c6 pawn, but it was necessary here to reduce the scope of black's dark squared bishop by playing instead b4, which would stop an immediate bishop c5, with sacks on e3 starting to look very dangerous. But here black can still play bishop c5 after creative pawn sacrifice a5, and after b takes a5 bishop c5, and black is still ahead, although the position isn't completely lost for white yet, but it's going to be very difficult to defend it. However, Vishy missed this move and this continuation, and that meant that Aronian could play the even stronger continuation after rook c1. Oops, hold on now. Okay, so yeah, we just said a3, rook e8, rook c1, and now Aronian has b4, and here black is significantly better, nearly a pawn and a half at this stage. And to make matters worse, Vishy now played another inferior move with a takes b4. Knight b1 was the best defense, although black is still much better after bishop f5 and knight d2, which is the best continuation. Playing instead queen takes a6 is much worse due to the continuation b takes a3, where best play continues bishop d4, bishop takes b1, rook takes b1, bishop b4 check, king f1, and c5, with a winning advantage to black. So knight d2 would be the right move, but now comes queen takes f2 check, which is okay because after king takes f2 there's bishop takes d3, and now comes a takes b4, bishop takes b4, knight f3 is best play, and black is still significantly better, a pawn up with the bishops and white having two isolated pawns. It's going to be very difficult for white to hold it, but there's still a lot of play in the position. Okay, that's the end of part 1.